Hi everyone, and welcome to MVP Public Speaking webinar, webinar number 3. And in this webinar, we'll be focused on creating impactful presentation content. I'll be your host for today. My name is Roy Gilad, and let's start. Well, first I want to highlight what we are actually doing here in this sessions. Part of our MVP culture is to help one another, and here in this webinar series, what we're trying to do is basically to give all the MVPs out there the tools to be successful speakers in no matter where they are speaking, if it's a webinar, if it's a Dreamforce presentation, or just a user group meeting. And we're here to enable, empower, encourage MVP to evangelize Salesforce and speak publicly. So that's us, the MVP presentation team, and our mission. And as I mentioned, my name is Roy Gilad, and I'll be your host for today. And today we're going to talk about content. Basically, the talk is about how you can actually create an impactful presentation content, what you need to think about when you're actually at the phase of planning your presentation. The content is where you're actually gathering all your thoughts and building up the way you want to tell the story, the way you want to tell it. We've got beautiful speakers in this session. We've got Dan, we've got Francis, we've got Brad, which each and every one of them will come and will present his own topic and how they're actually using this. And this specific slide is basically my bad slide, meaning this is how not to create the content. It has a lot of content in it. It has also a video clip, which I actually, if you want to hear that, it's really good. But then again, this is bad. So how to create actually good content? We've got Francis, who will present how to make it personal. We've got Brad with make it compelling and more facts, less text, and Dan Applebaum with telling the story. Later on, I'll be closing this webinar, but let's hit the road. And Francis.
Cool. Hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be talking about making it personal. So people want to see the real you. They want to see an honest talk that they can relate to that comes from your personality. At the end of the day, we're not all perfect. You know, we hit roadblocks as we're kind of doing things in Salesforce and things go wrong, but they want to see and kind of relate to those things that are going wrong in your talk, or not in your talk, but in how you work. And so, you know, sharing those personal stories and anecdotes will make it honest, interesting, and engaging. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So last year, I did a talk on security. And it was basically around Salesforce and increasing the security, looking at two-factor authentication, stuff like this. But my anecdote for that talk was basically about a friend of mine who actually mislaid her phone for about half a day, couldn't find where it was, and eventually it just turned up out of the blue. But then a couple of days later, she went to her bank, went into the bank, and the bank manager started asking her loads of strange questions. And she was in the bank for about an hour or two. And basically, she found out that somebody had taken all her money out of the bank account. And this was because the hackers had basically found her username and managed to get her username and password to our online bank, and they managed to get hold of a mobile phone. And because she'd had the default set on her phone in such a way that when the bank sent a text message to verify her identity, very much like Salesforce, that text message was displayed on the screen, even though her phone was still locked. So all the hackers need to do was get hold of her phone for a short period of time to get that code, and then they're into her account, being able to do whatever they like. And for me, it's kind of affected me quite a bit because for years, I've been promoting this kind of free online course that's actually created by the UK government on how to protect yourself online. And for me, it was like, well, if I'd only just mentioned it to her or been a bit more, you know, you should do this course, or, if I just talked to her about the basics, and maybe she, her life savings wouldn't have, just totally gone. Luckily, the bank was could cancel some of those transactions. But, this was basically what I started my talk off with, or partway through the talk, which kind of put a context around the whole talk. So, personal anecdotes, great things to make it a personal talk. Also, creating a unified visual theme, so consistency around how you're delivering and your personality as well. I'm a bit crazy, a bit nuts sometimes when I do my presentation, so that comes out in my kind of presentation style. Also, knowing your audience. So we talked about your kind of anecdotes and your personality coming through the slides and talking, but also understanding how to make your talk personal for the people in your audience. So potentially that could be asking questions at the beginning of the talk to find out who is in the audience. And I use this so that I can understand if it's going to be a really quick talk, or sorry, I'm going to focus on all the basics within the talk, or am I going to go more advanced into the more advanced topics of the talk, and I can kind of sway my talk as I'm going through. But also, if it's a meetup group, or if you're, got the chatter and you can see who's coming along, you can target the talk at those people, so it makes it more personal to them and more relevant to them. So, what are the conflicts to making a presentation personal? So the cookie cutter. Now, this is the presentation where you've been told, hey, this is the design you have to use. This is the formulaic way of doing things that you have to do, and that's it. And basically, one size doesn't fit all. You need to make it your own in some way. Even if you are got a kind of a core design that you have to use, you still have a bit of creativity within it to make it your own. Also, the borrowed shoes, that content, that presentation which you've been given, and you basically have to present it. But make sure you change it, or ask to see if you can change it to kind of make it your own, so it flows better. What worse, I've seen it before, where people are doing talks and it's basically a presentation they haven't done. They stumble on slides. They don't feel that it's theirs. And I've even actually had people presenting apologizing for some of the slides because they knew it was wrong. So why didn't you change it in the first place? And also the live demo death. So this also can be a bit of a disaster if you're doing your presentation and you're doing a live demo. So always have a backup for this. Now, a couple of different ways I do this is basically having either recording the demo and then playing the demo in the PowerPoint presentation if it all goes wrong, and again, make it yourself and make it your own, or just having a load of screenshots, which is basically you clicking on the screen, which is moving from slide to slide to slide to kind of do the demo. But yeah, always have a backup for your demo. And then finally, making it your own. This was me at Dreamforce last year. I just won the tail from the prize giving next to the stage, and I basically put it on, and it made it, uplifted it, my crazy way of doing talks. Everybody, quite liked it, and it kind of had the theme of Dreamforce as well, with Trailhead and the animals and everything else. So finally, the obligatory famous person quotation. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So make it your own. And that's the great American poet Maya Angelou. So that is it for me, for that. If anybody's got any questions, I don't know, we could do it at the end or now. Otherwise, it's on to Brad.
Yeah, wait, Francis, I have one question.
Yeah.
What happens if I can't make it personal, or I don't have an idea? How do you actually cope with this struggle?
So even if, I have that. Somebody's asked me, I don't have a personality. What do I put in it? And it's like, everybody's got a personality, however it is. And I think of it as how do you talk to individuals in your company? How do you talk to people, your friends, your family? You've got a style to you. And actually what I've done as well, I've actually recorded myself just in a social setting, but also recorded the first 5 minutes of my talk and compared them and gone, well, actually, I'm being really stilted. I'm being, it's not great. So that's my presentation, and using that presentation style to put into my talk so I can see actually how I react and how I act around people. It is a bit weird because you're filming loads of other people at the same time, but you can understand then what your personality is by looking at yourself.
Great, thanks. Well, now let's move to Brad. Brad can.
Yep. Give me just a second here.
Yeah.
Okay. Francis, first off, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Secondly, my name is Brad Gross. If you and I have not met, I apologize. Please, please, please run up to me and say hi to me. Love the chat. Love to get to know more of the MVPs out there. I've been around for a little bit. I've been quiet for a while, so I do apologize. But I am out. I'm on the Twitters, as one of my Australian friends used to call it. Please, please, please reach out and talk to me. I'd love to chat, even if it's online. My goal for the next couple of minutes is to talk about drawing attention. So I'm going to start with a kind of a simple example. Let's look at this slide. What am I trying to convey? Am I trying to convey a technical discussion? Am I trying to discuss usability? Am I trying to talk about the latest cake recipe from Epicurious? More than likely, you did not listen to the last sentence I said. Instead, what you probably did is read what was on my slide. It is okay, especially with Lightning, it's okay for us to have a lot of information. It's a huge change. And it is okay for us to have lots of good questions to provide to our audience. But there's a massive difference between creating a presentation that will be consumed through reading the presentation versus listening to a presenter deliver that same content. I'm hoping that the slide deck will get shared out. I put a link at the bottom. It's from National Public Radio here in the States, and it talks about multitasking. And it is nearly impossible for your brain to do multitasking. No matter how much we all think we can do it, it's nearly impossible to both read and listen at the same time. Because of that, it's important that we understand that, and then we deliver very impactful conversations. These are good questions. Some of these, and your questions for Lightning are probably going to be very different than my conversation for Lightning. Why not hand that out after the slides, after your presentation as a deliverable? Always a great way to get people's attention. But instead of this, let's replace it with this. Now, what is going to happen? You look at this, you understand the topic. I've framed the topic. But instead of your audience trying to read and pay attention to what's on the screen, they're paying attention to the words coming out of your voice. Now they will listen, they will pay more attention, and you can start dropping new facts as you think of them. It gives you a little bit more creative flexibility as well if you are a presenter that has that kind of ability. Some people do, some people do not. But the difference between the two slides is a matter of drawing attention to what is happening. Let me try another example. Let's assume that these are actually two slides on the same screen. Two slides. Now, when I'm starting, what holds your attention? Which ones of these slides will actually do I understand? As a person who has no information about what you're presenting and is trying to keep up with you talking, which of these slides will provide the most amount of attention? Us as MVPs, we are fortunate to be able to attend a lot of presentations that large organizations deliver. Salesforce being certainly one of them. What do they typically do? They typically show graphics. There's that famous one where if you look at one of their slide decks, they talk about the from client server to cloud computing and why multi-tenant is so important. They talk about that progression. They talk about the amount of subscribers, and there's that hockey stick graphic that they always use. They talk about Gartner Magic Quadrants, internal studies that they commission. They talk about surveys out on the world. They talk about, and they use, a lot of us doing presentations, we use quotes from famous people, Francis, and books, famous quotes from books. Anything to grab people's attention to make it applicable and make them understand that, number one, what I'm saying is factual. Number two, I've done the research and you should believe the words coming out of my mouth. And three, I'm trying to give you there's a little bit of an entertainment factor here. There's some functions that will let you pay attention to the words that I am saying so that then you believe it and you can move on to the next step, which is, now that I've given you these facts, I'm going to tell you one more thing that I now want you to accept as truth as well. This is where doing demos, even if they're screenshots, is powerful versus just me going online, going before and saying, Lightning is great, you should use Visualforce components. No one really, well, but why? Why should I believe you? Well, let me give you an example. So going for charts and graphics and statistics and quotes, and if you're going to use screenshots, a lot of us have big screens, zoom in. Make it so it's very, very easy to read. Don't show the whole page. Make it be factual and relevant, and now you will deliver solid and factual content that your audience will pay attention to, believe, and understand. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Dan.
Hey, Brad. Just a quick question from the audience. Hey, I'm the audience. Say, you said to narrow as much as you can the words on the screen. How would you advise to someone who's doing a technical demo and is showing a screen with lots of lines of codes? How would you approach that?
Well, aren't you, especially if you're doing a technical demo, we do a lot of technical demos around CPQ. Well, CPQ as a screen can be very complicated, but more importantly, what I'm typically trying to show is a snippet. I may be showing a configuration attribute or a couple custom fields that control pricing. I would only show those fields on the screen, and then give the user a little bit of context about where they are on the screen. If I'm writing code, if I'm doing code, there's always that ability of using fonts. If you look at a lot of the wikis out there, even Salesforce's dev community, you typically are encapsulating code into a different font so that people understand that there is text, which is the user typing, the author creating, versus the code itself. And so it's helpful to be able to separate, but it's also good to help them make sure that people understand that the audience may not be able to read through 1,000 lines of code, especially during a presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad. And our next speaker in line is Dan. The stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and I want to thank all concerned for the opportunity to present. Today, I would like to talk about telling a story. If you've been watching some of the earlier presentations, both today and previous ones, You probably heard a lot of people say, tell a story, but that's very important. As you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? Am I supposed to become like a minstrel? Am I supposed to become a storyteller? I have serious technical content to share. I have important things to say. What's this telling a story? Am I really expected to do this? Well, yes, because you see, dry technical content, just facts, tends to come up with this reaction. You put your audience to sleep. I know for myself, I've sat in more than one lecture and just sort of dozed off to the droning of the highly technical information that's coming my way. So telling a story helps keep people awake because of the way human beings are wired. We are wired to respond to emotion. We are wired to respond to stories. Uh, One of the things I often say is that it's the emotion that carries the content. When we feel engaged, when we feel excited about something, then we pay attention and we absorb the content. So getting that emotional content into your presentation is really important. Okay, so you know you need to tell a story, you need to add emotional content. How do you do it? How do you actually build a story? What do you do to accomplish this? So that's what I want to talk about today. So what is a story? A story starts with a character. You need a hero. So who's the character? Generally speaking, you sort of have two choices and you might use both. The character can be you, and that's when you hear about personalizing the story. When Francis spoke earlier, what does that mean? It means making yourself the hero in the story. But you can also use someone in the audience, for example, an admin. It could be somebody you know, uh, but it's got to be somebody that the audience can potentially identify with, because part of every story is you sort of see yourself as the hero. You're taking the journey with them. Next, you need conflict. You need a challenge to overcome. If you don't have a conflict, you don't really have a story. You have a narrative. And we want a story. We want that emotional content. So if you're going to have conflict, you need a villain, right? There has to be a bad guy. There has to be somebody there. Now, this villain can be technology. For example, in a number of my talks, limits were the villain, the challenge to overcome. But it can also be a manager. Your manager is the challenge, making them happy, accomplishing a goal. Salesforce support makes an excellent villain sometimes if you have a story to tell them on that score. So, okay, you have your hero, you have your villain, you have the challenge. Now you need growth. The character has to go through a journey. They have to learn. And this is where you nail them with the content. This is where you, as the speaker, are providing the hero with the information that they need in order to overcome that challenge. And once you've presented that content, once they've overcome the challenge, you have a resolution, which hopefully is a happy ending. Now, your audience has taken this journey with you. They've identified with the character. They've absorbed the content. They are engaged. They are happy. You get a standing ovation, and the presentation has gone fantastic. Excellent. This is awesome. Now, let's review from a different perspective. I just told you a story, right? I actually practiced what I preached here. Who's the hero? You are the hero. You, the presenter, are the hero. And your challenge, as I stated at the beginning, is having to tell a story. Having, instead of just sharing your content and technology, turning it into a story form. Which means the villain is me, the presentation team. All these people telling you to tell a story. We are presenting this challenge, so we are the villains in this story. The growth, the content, is how to tell a story. Laying it out to have the hero, the villain, the challenge, the growth, and the resolution. And the resolution is you now know how to take whatever content you have and turn it into a story that will be engaging. So we've actually gone through and demonstrated the process. Let's review. Another review. When we are taught to do presentations, one of the things I'm sure you've heard over and over again is you tell them what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and tell them what you told them. And they tell you spend 2 or 3 minutes per slide. That's sort of the rule of thumb. And that's okay. That's how all of my presentations were until about 5 years ago. About 5 years ago, I became a Pluralsight author, and one of the things we do at Pluralsight is we do screencasts. We do presentations to record. And they have a lot of really, really smart people who look for ways to make presentations better, to up the game, because that's their business. And one of the things I learned is an alternate approach. And the alternate approach is what you just saw. First of all, no bullets, right? As Brad said earlier, less text, more visuals. This is how I might have told the story 5 years ago. I would have had, how to tell a story, and I would have bullets for each section, and people would have been reading instead of watching. Instead, I used images because bullets do not convey emotion. Emotion carries the content, but that picture conveys emotion. I mean, there's nobody who's going to look at that picture now and not feel, I get it, I understand it. We've all been there. Also, visuals enhance understanding. So I can say emotion carries the content, but I can also show you emotion carries the content. That reinforces what I'm saying without distracting. Nobody's going to be distracted from what I'm saying because they're reading that slide. It's very engaging and visual. And pacing. Instead of the usual 2 to 3 minutes a slide, I was doing maybe 10 seconds per slide. And this is, again, it's not a better approach, but it is a different approach. It keeps the energy up, it keeps the pacing up. It is another way to do presentations. It's different, but it does work. So when you do a presentation and the session leader or the track leader says you have 50 slides, you might need to explain to them, no, I'm using this other style of presentations. There really will only be 10 seconds per slide. And they will hopefully understand that because it is sort of a newer approach. One last review, one last look at what we just did. I used images. I used clip art. I used Corel. I used Fotolia, which are licensed paid stock photos. I used pixels.com, which is public domain. This is really important because there's a temptation to just go to Google Images and pick images and throw them in there. But what happens is you do your presentation and Dreamforce or another session, and they put it online, they put it up on YouTube, and suddenly you're using unlicensed content. And if somebody goes and says, hey, you've used my photo, my copyrighted photo in your presentation, and they'll go to Salesforce and say, hey, why do you have this in YouTube? They'll take it down, and if they're sued, they'll go back and they'll say, well, the author, is liable, so don't come back and sue you or something like that, because ultimately you are responsible for the rights to anything that you include in your presentation. So it doesn't cost much. Pay for your stock photos. Make sure that any images you use are public domain or are appropriately licensed. Now, I did end, this is my final slide, with bullets, and this is a place where bullets can be used. Text is useful. For example, if I had just told you pixels.com, you'd probably go to the wrong place for the stock photo. But when you have specific information that you really want people to be able to reference or copy down, that's a good place to put in text. And that's the story.
Beautiful story it is. And just one question then. How would you approach if you're having a very unattractive story, let's say release notes, or I'm releasing a new version of my quote tool, I'm adding in some enhancements. How would you make a story out of it?
Enhancements are pretty easy because where did the enhancement come from? I had a customer who was frustrated because they couldn't do this. Now, my customer is now the hero. There was a challenge. My lack of a feature was the villain. I can show the growth. I could also use the process of coming up with the enhancement. If it's a technical talk and I want to explain how I enhanced it, what are the challenges I faced? I had to overcome limits. I had to overcome a platform bug. There's almost always there's always a story in there. Even release notes. It can be as simple as I spent a week of my vacation reading 2,000 pages of release notes. My head is exploding. I'm going to show you the important things so you can enjoy your vacation. You can almost always, not almost, you can always find an emotional connection to the material.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And that were our three lines of speakers. That was our line of speakers, which were Brad, Dan, and Francis. Each of them told us a different approach how to provide beautiful content, how to build it, how to tell your story, how to make it coherent to your users. The next webinar will be next month and week. Will be hosted by David Giller with Joshua, Steve, and Jody. Again, speakers that I love to hear at any time, same as these speakers that we had today. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you've learned from it as much as I did. And thank you, and goodbye.